Mr. Clingman, at the end of our last segment, you mentioned that you attended the Million Man March on Washington,
Right.
and then came home to Cincinnati and launched the African American Chamber of Commerce. Was
Hmm.
there something that happened in D.C. as part of that march that really inspired you to do that? Was there a connection?
Yes, there was certainly a connection. Of course, my commitment was there before I went. My commitment to do something in economic empowerment. And like I said, I wrote the original paper for the Chamber in '91. But it just wasn't hitting, I guess, it wasn't taking legs back then with people in Cincinnati. But after I went to the march, of course, we stood there all day long, participated, and heard all the speeches and everything. And when I came back, I was enthusiastic even more than I was before I left, and saying, hey, we got to do something. You know, we can't just go and stand all day and talk and feel good and come home and do nothing. I'm about doing good rather than just feeling good, or in addition to feeling good, because it was a good feeling to be there. So I talked to different people after I got back home and said, we got to do this chamber. We have to have a chamber. We're 43% of the population that don't have a business organization that advocates for black businesses. So the more I talked about it, the more the word got around, and I was finally able to get this guy who had these meetings with entrepreneurs on a monthly basis to agree to let me come and address them. And I gave him a little spiel and that night, and before I sat down, I said, how many of you in here would be willing to pay, say, $100 a year to have your own Chamber of Commerce? All the hands flew up and everything. And little did I know that they would bring their money up to the table that night. And about 42 people came up, gave cash, gave checks, and they said, we'll start it tonight. That's how it got started, June 14th, 1996,
Mm-hmm.
about 9 months after the Million Man March.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is the organization still active?
Yes, yes, it's still active. During the time that I was there, I worked as a volunteer, the executive director, the president, for about 18 months. And then I was finally able to get a salary, and I left my job with the Career Resource Center in the public sector to go and work for the Chamber full time. And during my tenure, we moved to about 500 members and went from a budget of about $25,000 a year to over $1 million. And I left in May of 2000. And it's still, I managed to get a building for the Chamber. We have our own building.
Mm-hmm.
And it's still here in Cincinnati. You may see it before you leave, but it's there and still up and running. I'm not involved with it anymore, but I know what role I had in it, and that's good enough for me.
Okay. Now, where's that building located?
So on Gilbert Avenue, matter of fact, it's right across the street from the Harriet Beecher Stowe House, in a very historic part of Cincinnati where a lot of black entrepreneurs used to be, and I was happy to get a building right there where people, you won't know these names probably, Horace Sudduth, who owned a hotel right down the street from the African American Chamber building, a guy named Wendell Dabney, who had a newspaper. He lived right down the street around the corner from the building, and there was all kinds of entrepreneurs there in the 30s, 40s, and 50s in that one section of Cincinnati called Walnut Hills.
Okay. Now, again, getting back to the idea of the Million Man March and the inspiration associated with that, why did you feel that was something you needed to participate in?
Well, if there were 999,999 men there, and I made that million, I wanted to be there to make that million. It was just something I just always said, if they're going to be there, I have to be there. If this is going to happen, I have to be there. And like I said, I missed the March on Washington. But
In 63.
In 63.
Mm-hmm.
But I was determined to go to this. Not for reasons that people would think most men went. I think initially people thought, oh, they're just going because Minister Farrakhan called and people are going to go because somebody's going to be there. That wasn't my reason for going. My reason for going was to be with 1 million black men, standing up for principle and creating what I envisioned to be closer relationships that would evolve to strategies that would not only bring us closer together, but maybe stop some of the violence that was going on among and between black men, and give us more pride. And you know, the whole ball of wax is where I went. I didn't go because of any personality who would be there. I went just to soak in the relationships. I met people, and you know, just the hugging. I never hugged anybody before I went to the Million Man March. I wasn't a hugger. It was a standoff thing. But when I came back, now you know, it's a natural thing with men. So all of that was, you know, went into my reasons for going. I just knew I had to be there. Something inside you, there's no way. I mean, I never said I'm not going to go.
Mm-hmm.
I had to go.
Do you think that was true for a lot of the men who you had a chance to meet with there, that it wasn't really about Farrakhan and the
Right.
call for a day of atonement?
Right.
Is this the coming together of the men of the community?
Yes, yes. There were surveys done, of course, among the people who were there. I know I know two men who did that, and we may get to that in the interview. But a lot of people came because they wanted to express as an individual, or be a part of a collective expression of unity, of standing together and making a statement. I wrote my first little book on the Million Man March, which I'll share with you. But they said they came because they wanted to make a statement. Others said that they came because they wanted to look for ways to deal with economic empowerment, to create ways to empower us as a people, and to set the examples as men, to lead the way to do that, to be examples for our children. So all of those things were reasons for people coming.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm glad that we were able to introduce this topic, because this is the 10th anniversary year for the
Right.
march, and
That's right.
of course Minister Farrakhan calling for another march now in the fall of 2005. You think you might be a part of that?
It depends. When I got back, I did a television interview here in Cincinnati on one of the programs. They were asking me about the Million Man March. And the host asked me, suppose they have it again. You think it should be an annual thing? You know what I said? And I have it on tape today. I said, we can't do this again. That's what I said. I said, this will never happen again. We may do another march, but we're not going to do this again. This is a once in a lifetime thing. That's just how strongly I felt about it then. Because one thing that took place there was the passing of the money. I wrote an article in February of 1995 in black newspapers that said, I hope that when we go to Washington, we will raise some money collectively and do something, start a collective fund or something. Something has to come out of this march that has an economic basis. And when they called for the donations, you should have seen all of that money it was like a wave. It was just being passed from hand to hand. Just here, pass it down. They had these big boxes. Collect. That was one of the best feelings for me, because I'm thinking, we have to do something. We can't have all these people here and not do anything with some money. Mm-hmm. You know, unfortunately, it didn't lead to anything nationally. And that's a big issue that I have with what took place at the march and what did not take place at the march. Mm-hmm. I know the expenses had to be paid. We couldn't go there free. You had to pay for that, all the sound equipment, everything had to be paid for. But from that point, the fact that we pooled our money, millions of dollars was raised right then and there in an instant. The fact that we did that should have had some impetus for us to come home and to create local funds, which Jim stuck his neck out and did it again in Cincinnati. But I was very disappointed because there was no sustained effort to continue that. Anything you do in this country, you're going to have an economic base. And I was very impressed with that, and I was proud to put my little donation in too. But that was the disappointment. So I said, we can't do that again on that program. I said, you can't do this again. This was bigger than life. This was something that you'll never see again. They may do another march, but it won't be this one. So now you ask if I'm planning on going back. I have some thoughts about that. And I'm thinking, if it's in Washington, I don't think I'm going. I hope, and I plan on writing something about this, maybe a letter to Mr. Farrakhan or somebody, to suggest that it be in Detroit. If we would have a Million Man March in Detroit, I'm there. Why Detroit? 87% black. Why Detroit? No business, no economic enclave controlled, managed by black people. Of course, the history of Detroit, its central location is also good. But the fact that, I don't know if you've been keeping up with the news, but a few months ago there was a plan put forth to the city council and to the mayor to develop a black business enclave in Detroit. And I just think that symbolically going to Washington, to me, going back 10 years later, would suggest symbolically that we're going back to Washington to ask the government, to ask the establishment for something. Now, people say, well, we go back to apologize and atone and all that. That's not why I went. And that's not why I would go this time. Symbolically going to Detroit, to me, would be saying to us as a people that we're asking ourselves for something. Something that we have, but we haven't been willing to give. So I don't even know if anybody's talked to him about Detroit or not, but I plan to write something about it because I think that's where we should be. If I had to choose, I would pick Detroit. So, like I said, if it's Washington, I probably won't go. Not because I have anything, it's a negative thing or anything, I just probably won't go because, like I said, we can't do the Million Man March again. Can't do that one again. But if it's in Detroit, I'll be there.
Okay. Well, Mr. Clingman, I guess there is certainly a lot to be said for what individuals can do when they're acting collectively. For something like a Million Man March.
That's
and
right.
Even if $1 is
That's
passed
right.
from every
That's
hand,
right.
it's $1 million
That's right. That's
venture
right. That's right.
before the day is over.
That's right.
But I wanted to ask also about this idea of leadership, you know, of an individual who can act as a power broker. And I know you said you were in Chicago for a time and you had the opportunity to work in that city during the tenure of Mayor Harold Washington.
Right.
And so can you just help me to understand, as someone who's lived all of her life in Ohio, what it was about that man that made him such a leader at the national level, not just for the blacks who were concentrated on the south side of Chicago.
That's right.
You know, what was that about?
He had a personality, and I'm not going to sit here and make you think I was a personal friend of his. I knew him, I met him, I did work with his staff. But from what I could see from my vantage point, his personality was such that, first of all, he was very strong-minded, and he knew what he had to do, and he was determined to do it. But his personality was such that he reached out to all of the people in Chicago, and did the things that led to empowerment among the marginalized, traditionally marginalized groups, namely African Americans and others. He made waves, especially among the council, you know, and the aldermen that they had there. And I remember Verdoliak, he used to be always at odds with Harold Washington, and I think he's still there on the city council in Chicago. But Harold made waves. And if you're going to change, especially the Chicago machine, you have to be willing to take some risk, and you have to understand that there were a lot of people who didn't like what he did. He knew that going in, saw it, but he heard the call of the people and responded to it and stood up like a man and did what he was supposed to do as the leader of the city of Chicago, and opened up many doors to people that had been traditionally closed. And I admired that about him. I admired him for that. And you're right, he brought that city together in a way that has not been done since, probably hadn't been done before. And I think that's what made him larger than life and put him on the national scale and everything, because Chicago's a tough town. You know, Chicago's a tough town, but he made significant changes and opened up a lot of doors for a lot of people who would not have normally had those doors open for them.
Okay. So as someone who was written about and lectured about and encouraged other people to think and act with their own economic interest in mind,
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that government will have a major role to play, government policy especially, in invigorating businesses in the black community, or is it going to have to come from the grassroots level?
Well, I think both, but the initiative has to come from uh, those of us who are out here on the grassroots level, the activists. We have to. There are certain things we have to do, certain sacrifices we have to make to show people that we are serious about what we say we want and need. Of course, the government can play a role in it, but I wouldn't want the government to be the sole provider of the things that we need. I think Thomas Jefferson said a long time ago that a government large enough to give you everything you need is also large enough to take away everything you have. So we must participate in the political system to shape public policy that's going to advantage us as black people. And politics is about self-interest. Unfortunately, over the last 40 years, although we've had some 12,000 black people elected to public office, we're still economically at the bottom of every economic category in this country. And there obviously was a disconnect somewhere in the last 40 years, and I say it took place around 1965 to 1970 or 1975. So while we do need the government to some degree, the government helped major corporations. If you know your history, major corporations got subsidies from the government. That's how they are what they are today. So I'm not saying that we shouldn't get, we pay taxes. I'm not saying we shouldn't get assistance from the government, but certainly we should be serious enough about our own economic destiny that we're willing to make the sacrifices, as Frederick Douglass admonished us. You can't expect to have crops with no rain and thunder. So we have to make some sacrifices and take on some struggles sometimes to make people know, to let them know we're serious about this. We're serious about our children's future. And we're going to build an economic legacy and leave it here for them. And we're going to do our part. We expect you to do your part. And if you don't, we're going to implement some kind of sanction against you. The problem with black people in this country collectively, number one, is that we don't stick together to a great degree to demand certain things. We know power concedes nothing without a demand, as Frederick told us. But the other issue is that we won't pool our resources, both intellectual and financial, to create a base, a foundation. When I started the Black Chamber, I insisted that the way we would start it would be with our money. And traditionally in Cincinnati, when people want to start things, they've got to run downtown to Procter & Gamble, got to go ask Kroger's, got to go. I said, no, we're not asking anybody for any money. If we don't put our money down to start this chamber with our dollars, we don't need it. We don't deserve it. We obviously don't want it. So the foundation was laid with black dollars. And then as we progressed, other corporations came in. Oh, we like to help. That's fine. But the foundation was there with our money. And I think that's true, and it should be true on a collective basis to move us forward in terms of economic empowerment collectively in this country. But we have to show that we're serious about it. How do you show you're serious? You put yourself in a position to be able to reward your friends and punish your enemies. How do you do that in this country? With dollars. With dollars. I was in Tulsa, Oklahoma about 3 weeks ago. Went to the Greenwood district, which you know was flourishing in the early 1900s. Some 600 black businesses had everything from restaurants to all the way up to an airline. Everything black folks needed, they had it right there in the Greenwood district. In 1921, it was destroyed, burned to the ground. Burned to the ground because an angry white mob came in and destroyed it. And 300 people were killed. You look at those kinds of things, and even though it was back then during segregation, it shows you what can be done among people who are collective in their struggle, among people who are committed to being economically empowered. And we could do the same thing today if we would just use our resources in a collective manner in support of one another, as other groups are doing in this country every single day. You look at the Vietnamese, they've only been here for 30 years. They control the nail industry now. Koreans control the distribution of black hair care products. The people who came from India and Pakistan, 2/3 of the hotels and motels in this country owned by them. There is no way we should have dropped the economic ball in 1965 and just went and to play the political game alone. We should have stayed on both. Nobody abandons their economic base. We did. And now we're paying dearly for it, trying to get back to where we were, to where our brothers and sisters were, to where our elders were in 1921 in Tulsa, Oklahoma. So, you know, I have some real deep feelings about that, and major concerns about where we are versus how long we've been in this country. We've been here since it started. And there's a lot of work to do on the economic side, and that's why I'm so committed to it.
Okay. So is that the message we're going to read when we visit your website?
Oh,
or
yes.
columns in the newspapers,
Yes.
letters to the editors?
That's right.
It's the same message.
It's the same message.
Economics.
Economic empowerment.
Okay.
Economic empowerment. The only way we can fight in this country to make an impact is with our dollars. I always say the new battlefield is the marketplace, and the weapons are dollars. If we don't use that, use the $723 billion collectively that we earn, and it's rising, that we don't use that in some way to leverage the things that we say we want and need, and to build an economic foundation for our children, we're not being good stewards of what God has given us. We're just being slothful, as it says in the Bible. We are just squandering our resources. How can you have that much money and tremendous amounts of intellectual capital and not be further along and not be higher on the economic scale in this country than we are today? And even further back, relatively speaking, than our elders were back during the days of Tulsa and Durham, North Carolina, which was a flourishing business enclave for black people, and many other cities around the country as well.
Now, Mr. Clingman, I know you said you lecture in addition to the writing. You teach at
Yes.
the university level.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Do you find that your students, the members of the audiences where you lecture, that they are receptive to the message that you deliver, and are they acting on the
Now
information?
you just asked the right question. They're very receptive. I speak all over the country, and I tell people right off, I didn't come just to make you feel good. I came to say something to make you do good. And it's a message that is very well received, because I didn't make it up. It didn't just start with me. Our ancestors put forth this message years and years and years ago, and they showed us what to do. My latest book, called Black on Knowledge, reconnects us to the knowledge that our ancestors passed down to us. They're saying, look, we showed you guys what to do. Why don't you just do it? And so I don't have any proprietary claim over this economic empowerment message. I'm just one in a long line of griots, really, that continue to pass it down. So the message is well received. But now the acting part, the doing, you know, that's where I have issues. There's not enough doing. We know what we must do in this country. You can't tell me that as intelligent as we are, that we don't know what needs to be done. It's just the doing that seems to get in the way. And until we change that, we're going to find ourselves going, I think, further and further down on the scale as other groups continue to build up their economic base, surpassing us in a lot of ways. It's just